Fi was such an amazing character to me as a fan. She's one of my favorite companions in the entire series, if I'm being real. Now, for those of you that are still here, after I said such a controversial statement, hi, I appreciate you and your time so much. I'm D-Rock, and today I have a theory on how Fi could potentially play an extremely crucial role in the plot of the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Let's get it rolling. I think one of the main reasons why we as fans of the Zelda series want to know more about the sequel to Breath of the Wild is that there's still just so much we really don't know about the game. For one thing, it's not entirely clear what the game's actual plot is. Kudos to Nintendo for continuously keeping us in the dark. I mean, even if we look at the two trailers that have been revealed, there's still little to no information of the plot of the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Literally everything from the fate of Zelda to what exactly Link's final draw-up will look like is still up for debate in a time when Nintendo doesn't even want to reveal the Breath of the Wild sequel's title for fear of spoiling details. It's pretty interesting. Of course, Nintendo leaving us in the dark gives us endless possibilities to speculate and theorize on what could potentially happen. I think a lot of the Zelda community wants to know exactly where Breath of the Wild sub-series is going and how the overall Zelda lore lies into it. Now, for instance, I would personally like to know if the Master Sword is going to play a more significant role in Breath of the Wild 2. Now, because of Breath of the Wild's weapon system, which honestly diverges drastically from the series' traditional way of doing things, the fate of Link's signature weapon is quite certainly unclear. But it might play another part. My theory here is that I think Breath of the Wild 2 has something to do with Skyward Sword, which could mean Fi will re-emerge from the Master Sword to potentially guide Link. Now, if rumors about Demise's return are true, then Fi's return would have to be a thing as well, right? I mean, we really can't have one without the other. In the majority of the Zelda games that involve the Master Sword, there is a major plot point in which Link eventually learns about the sword and has to retrieve it to advance, right? For the most part. From that point on in the game, it almost never leaves his side. Our boy literally goes to sleep with this bad boy on his back. I mean, I would think that'd be insanely uncomfortable. Anyways, Breath of the Wild couldn't have treated the Master Sword differently. In comparison to the usual way Link uses the Sword of Evil's Bane, the Link in Breath of the Wild finds the sword in the forest, learns from the Great Deku Tree that in order to obtain the sword, it's a matter of literally going and grabbing the sword only if you have the necessary amount of hearts, or you will die. Quite literally. It is a far less ceremonious role for the Master Sword than we're used to, at least for me. I actually enjoyed this addition. It really makes the Master Sword feel like it can only be wielded by the true hero and no one else. You feel me? Yeah, you could say that the Breath of the Wild DLC focused on tempering the Master Sword, sure, and that did help make it that much more significant, but it's still a trivial part of the game as a whole. Breath of the Wild 2 has an amazing opportunity to change that here, I believe, and the odds are fairly high at this point that it will. Especially if the sequel has anything to do with Skyward Sword, right? Skyward Sword is all about the creation of the Master Sword and the beginning of Link and Zelda's eternal struggle against evil. This is the game that started it all, the endless reincarnation of Zelda, Link, and Ganondorf. Nintendo even went as far as to give the Master Sword a personality in the form of Fi to emphasize the sword's importance. I absolutely love this. It is then shown in cutscenes that Fi disappears into the Master Sword at the end of Skyward Sword, but there's nothing stopping Nintendo from reviving Fi so that she can change the course of the plot of Breath of the Wild 2, especially if our boy Demise has anything to do with the events that will eventually happen in Breath of the Wild 2. Now, I'm willing to bet that I'm not alone here in believing that the Demon King Demise, Skyward Sword's ultimate antagonist and the demonic ancestor of Ganon, could potentially return in his true form in Breath of the Wild 2. Now, if that's the case, Link and Zelda will need to know how he was defeated last time, right? Fi was there for the entire battle against Demise, so you would think that it would make perfect sense if she sort of came back to help this reincarnated version of Link and Zelda. Breath of the Wild even sort of reinstates that the goddess Hylia as an important divine figure. As her creator, Hylia could revive Fi to tap into her knowledge for the new war against Demise. I mean, honestly speaking, she's basically a computer program anyway, and if you've played the game, you know exactly what I mean. Now, as far as we know, Breath of the Wild 2 is still going to make use of Breath of the Wild's weapon inventory, giving Link a broad range of weapons to use. I mean, honestly speaking, I think swapping this out would take way more time than they actually want to take on this game. That being said, that would mean he probably won't carry the Master Sword the whole time. However, there's still a way to make the sword and Fi important. An example here that I could think of could be that the Master Sword's power gets dampened by the power of Demise. Stay with me, okay? Making it not useful to Link at all, but Fi might still emerge and protect it until Link can rid it of Demise's influence, eventually wielding the Master Sword in the sequel to Breath of the Wild 2's finale. How insanely cool and epic would that be? Now, we can't forget about the Demon Lord Girahim, right? I mean, if this theory is bringing back Fi as well as Demise, then we have to include Girahim, and in my opinion, being one of the best villains in the entire series. But anyways, opinions aside, this in itself could present another interesting possibility for the Master Sword. At the end of Skyward Sword, if you've played the game, we all know that Girahim reveals that he's a sword spirit just like Fi, transforming into Demise's sword. I mean, this was his whole purpose in his existence. Here's something pretty interesting for you. Maybe the Master Sword will transform into Fi in the same way, keeping the Master Sword safe by containing all of its power inside one person or being. Now, if that actually does happen, then Fi can travel with Link and perhaps even fight alongside him while keeping the Master Sword safe until the moment she is no longer needed. I mean, this is something that has happened many times in the Zelda series with our companions. Navi left Link towards the end of Ocarina of Time. Midna went back to the Twilight Realm after she helped the hero of Twilight complete his mission. And then, of course, Tattle returned to the Skull Kid's side at the end of Majora's Mask. It just fits if you really think about it. So here's the kicker. The most important piece of evidence that Fi may return in Breath of the Wild 2 is when she seems to make minor appearances in Breath of the Wild. During scenes from Breath of the Wild, Zelda mentions that the Master Sword once had a voice, right? And then later she claims to hear the Master Sword speaking to her when Link is in peril. Additionally, when Link perfects the Master Sword through the Trial of the Sword, we get to hear one of Fi's sound effects emerge from the blade. I 100% believe that all of these references to Fi suggest Nintendo wants to use her again in some way, and probably a lot sooner than later. All of these hints at Fi's reawakening suggest that she may make a true appearance in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. It could happen. Now, even as confusing and complex as the Legend of Zelda timeline is, a crossover between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild 2 would be a twist on the course of the series. I mean, there's been plenty of sequels or connected games over the years, but Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, they seem to exist at opposite times of the timeline. Does that make sense? And connecting the two games would mean that there's probably some massive cataclysmic event on the horizon, potentially redefining the series forever. Of course, with Nintendo, nothing is certain, but if any of our fan theories are correct, Breath of the Wild 2 is definitely going to be worth the wait. I mean, it's super exciting as fans of this amazing game, right? The return of Fi and other Skyward Sword characters would be amazing, and it would be an epic climax, in my opinion, to the Legend of Zelda series, until they decide to make another game. I hope you found some value in our conversation today. If you did, help me out by smashing that like button and dropping a comment below on what you think about Fi playing a crucial role in the plot of the sequel to Breath of the Wild. This is quite literally one of the best things you can do to help me with the YouTube algorithm, so thank you so much. Subscribe, turn on all notifications to get notified every time I post a new video about the Legend of Zelda series, and hey, listen, as a reward for making it to the end, make sure you click here so we can nerd out on some more Zelda. Let's talk soon. Much peace and love. Be the light, my friend.